President of the United States, Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Good afternoon, Oskaloosa. Thank you. We are in the middle of, or I guess coming toward the end of a fantastic swing. It began with some culinary delights at the Iowa State Fair. We've been making the rounds of different rural communities, talking about our plan to lift up rural economies, and we are so glad to be with you this afternoon. This is a fantastic crowd, and it makes us feel very, very welcome here. So I hope this is the first of many conversations that we're able to have. I thank you for taking time enough to care about where our country is headed at a moment so pivotal that I think even now we may not be aware of just how much is on the line. That this is not just about making sure that we get a better president, and Lord knows we need a better president. This is about speaking to the conditions that have been holding our country back for as long as I've been alive. Because I think some of those issues that we've been living with, accepting the unacceptable for far too long, are actually part of how we got the president we're living with right now. That you don't even get a guy like this anywhere near the Oval Office, not even within cheating distance, unless there are some things that are already going wrong in this country. And I think we know about that here in the Midwest. Broken promises, communities shrinking, an economy to where even when the numbers go up, we don't see it in our actual lives. We've got to change that. And we have an opportunity to change that right now with a better kind of leadership. But it begins by being willing to walk away from what doesn't work and embrace something new and better. And that's what this campaign is all about. Now we're going to do it in the name of the values that bring us together as Americans. And I know sometimes when you hear the word values, you hear about that as if it was only something that Republicans talked about. I'm here to say that these aren't Republican values, they're American values, and that when you take them seriously, they have progressive implications. Think about freedom. We all believe in freedom. Sometimes our Republicans friends talk about freedom like all there is to it is just cutting taxes on corporations. I believe that freedom requires making sure that every single American has health care, because you're not free to live a life you're choosing if you're not able to get covered. I believe that if we really want to live free and productive lives, then we've got to be able to make enough, earn enough to live on with any job. Even an entry-level job, at the very least, if you're working full-time and you're good at it, you should not be living in poverty. It's one of the reasons why I believe a very important American freedom is the freedom to organize for a good day's pay for a good day's work, and that's why we stand to organize labor. I'm concerned about the backsliding on basic freedoms in our most intimate areas of life. Like making sure that women's reproductive freedom is not being dictated by male politicians and bosses. And I believe that you ought to be free to choose your own spouse without a county clerk doing it for you based on their version of their religion. Time, we got to help one another lift up our lives, lift up our communities, build the kinds of lives that we seek to live in the American dream. That means making sure everybody has access to education, which is why I will appoint a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education for everyone. The values that bring us together as Americans need to be seen in a new light in the 21st century, especially when it comes to what it takes to keep this country safe. So there's a lot more to national security than just hugging the American flag. We've got to honor what the American flag actually stands for. One of the things the American flag stands for is the idea that if our elected leaders do wrong, we are free to criticize them without ever finding that we're being questioned in its loyalty to the republic for which it stands, let alone being told to go back to where we came from. In the 21st century, keeping America safe means being ahead of threats that didn't exist before, cybersecurity threats, election interference from abroad. We're not going to be able to deal with those 21st century threats by relying on a 17th century security solution like putting up a wall. It's going to take more than that. It's going to take a lot more than that. We have to confront domestic terrorism, especially white nationalist violence that is spreading across the land. And we have to make sure that we never allow the Second Amendment to be twisted into an obstacle against common sense gun safety like background checks and dealing with assault. And if we really mean business about security, we got to face up to the fact that climate disruption is one of the biggest security challenges in our time and act accordingly. These values should bring us together, not be used to drive us apart. Whether it's freedom, whether it's patriotism, whether it's service, which is why I believe that we ought to have national service available for every American who wants to, up to 1 million civilian service opportunities across the land, working on everything from climate projects to serving seniors to community health issues. It will help bring us together, and it's the right thing to do. Believe in fairness as a basic American value, which is why there ought to be fair wages for everybody, and $15 an hour ought to be the beginning, not the end of the conversation. But honoring these values means taking each other seriously, means taking our democracy seriously. And we should not accept living in a democracy where dollars can outvote people, where Citizens United tells us that a corporation has the same political soul as your neighbor, where districts can be drawn, not in Iowa, which is impressive, but in so many parts of our country. Districts can be drawn to where politicians are choosing their voters rather than the other way around. That's not democracy. We've got to stand up for our democracy. It is the most important treasure that we have in this country, and if we lose that, nothing will be able to keep us safe or make us free. So that's some of what we believe. Let me tell you about what we're actually going to do. Because we have seen some of the same conversations going on in this country for as long as I have been alive, but not nearly enough has actually changed. It's why we need action, not just words. We have an action plan to counter violent extremism and domestic terrorism in this country. We have an action plan to make sure that when the rising tide rises in the American economy, that it really does lift all boats. It really does make us better off in our community. We got a plan to make sure that we have racial equity in our time, because your race should have no bearing on your health or your wealth or your relationship with law enforcement. And we've got an action plan to lift up rural communities across the country. We need to reverse the decline in healthcare providers and the closure of rural hospitals so that life expectancy is the same no matter where you live in this country. We need a federal government that will support local innovation and regional cooperation when counties and towns are ready to partner up with their neighbors and use technology in order to create new jobs. We got to support that, and we will under my administration. We'll also make it easier for those local communities to access federal resources. If there's anybody here involved in local government, you know that applying for grants or getting help from the federal government is a convoluted, complicated process that for smaller communities can stop them from applying at all. That's why we're going to set up a much simpler process, a common application that is user-friendly, so that we're actually sending a signal for small communities to be able to access these grants just as much as the bigger cities. And we're going to encourage communities that welcome immigration as a way to grow population with community leaders. It's part of how my city's growing, and it's part of how our communities can grow. We need to not only grow jobs, we got to grow population. And there are ways to do it that will make us all better off. Now, when I talk to Democrats around the state or around the country, what I find is that they'd be happy with pretty much any of us as long as we could beat this president. folks who would vote for a ham sandwich if he could beat this president. But we can do better. I am, though, worried that we might make a mistake in this party. And the mistake would be to try too hard to play it safe. The problem with playing it safe is we need to inspire people too. And we can't look like our message is to just kind of turn back the clock and go back to normal. We are where we are because normal didn't work. In our part of the country, normal has failed us for far too long, and there's no going back to normal. There's no again. It's about making sure the future is better than the past and representing something that's going to be new and different. That's what this campaign is about. Motivated by our values, but committed to real and serious action. And dedicated to the idea that the future will be one that we can be proud of if we make the right choices right now in 2020. See, this right now is the moment. We are living in one of those moments that come along once or twice in a lifetime that set up how the next decades are going to go. It puts even more power than usual in your hands as Iowa caucus goers, as the vetting committee that is evaluating the 50 or so people who want to run for president who come through your tents. Because the choice we make right now will set us up for a moment that will be too late if we wait any longer. By 2030, there could be 130 million more guns on our streets. The average house in this country would cost $500,000. A college education will be $200,000. And a woman's right to choose might not even exist. That's the future we're looking at, not in some way off flying space cars kind of future. I'm talking about 10 years from now. Or we can act, and we can be proud. When our kids are asking 10 years from now, what did you do in order to make my life better? We can talk about how we actually got ahead of climate change before it was too late. We can tell them that we actually took the steps that were required to lift up our economy and make it work for everybody. We can tell them that we delivered real safety so that when you go to school, you just get to concentrate on school instead of worrying about whether you're physically safe. We will be proud of what we did in 2020 if we have the courage to step away from the past and embrace something different. And that's what I'm asking for your help with. That's why I'm running for president. That's why I'm seeking your support. And that's what I'd like to talk about with anybody who has a question or an idea. So I'm going to suspend my monologue and let's begin the conversation. Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming to the great state of Iowa and our community. I guess before we do anything else, you got to put first things first. Assume you win the nomination. Before you get to the White House, how do you plan on going toe-to-toe with Trump and combating the names and rhetoric and all that?
Right. So the good news is you can tell the president hasn't quite figured out what to do with me because he thinks of a new kind of name or attack every time he brings me up. Sooner or later, he'll come up with more. I'm not that worried about him. In fact, I'm looking forward to the chance to show Americans a contrast. A different, well, obviously a different style, different approach. Also, we made some different choices in life. And I think Americans ought to have the opportunity to see the president stand next to a war veteran and explain how he used his millionaire connections to be able to fake a disability to avoid serving when it was his turn. Having said all that, I actually think that's only about 10% of it. Because the biggest discipline that the nominee is going to have, and that I seek to bring into this race, is to defeat this president's ability to make it all about him. Trouble is, the more we talk about him, less we're talking about you. And this election is about us. It's about everyday life. That's why human beings as a species invented politics, was to try to make our lives better. And this is winning turf for us. Remember, we're the ones trying to preserve your health care and they're trying to take it away. We're the ones trying to get higher wages and they're blocking it at every turn. We're the ones who insist on gun safety reforms that voters in both parties want, but politicians in that party have been blocking. We're the ones trying to deliver paid family leave. We're the ones who believe in organized labor. We are standing with the majority of the American people, which is exactly why he needs us talking not about how we're going to make a difference in your life, but about whatever his latest tweet was. I haven't checked in the last hour. I'm sure there's something new that I'll get asked about next time I'm talking to a reporter. And he has a gift for taking all the energy that goes his way, even if it's criticism, and just turning it into a kind of food and growing off of it. So the biggest thing we've got to do, it's kind of like, it's basically the crazy uncle treatment. We got to correct what he has to say and acknowledge when something's wrong and say that it's wrong. When he tells a lie, we got to say what the truth is. Then we got to turn right around and talk about what's really important to us instead of allowing him the power to change the subject. I'm convinced that if we do that, we will win, and that is how I will handle this president when I'm competing with him for the presidency. Yes, ma'am.
There's a humanitarian crisis at the border. What would you do immediately to ease the backlog? What would you do in the midterm? What would you do to in the long range?
Thank you. I like the way you set up the question. It's about the crisis at the border and what we're going to do immediately, in the medium term, and in the long term. That's exactly how I think of it, too. There are things we've got to do on day one, and there are things that are going to take a while to set up. First of all, let's think about how we got here. This is a mixture of cruelty and incompetence. This is not the first time that we have had this many people come to our border. And yet, for some reason, it is the first time that we've seen images of this kind of suffering at the border. What does that mean? It means that this administration and this president are not capable or not willing, and we know it's both, to actually do the right thing there. Look, we can manage the border in a way that is consistent with our laws and consistent with our values. And that's what we've got to do. What does that mean on day one? It means making sure that we never separate children from their parents. It means moving away from private detention centers for children, because nobody ought to make a buck off of locking up kids in cages. And it means getting more resources. If we had more immigration judges and lawyers, we wouldn't see these awful spectacles with 3-year-old kids supposed to speak up for themselves in a court proceeding. It doesn't make any sense. And part of that is a decision, a failure to put resources down there to clear these asylum claims. So that's day one. The medium term, what we got to do is have comprehensive immigration reform. And by the way, most Americans want us to do this, and Washington hasn't delivered. We know what we've got to do. We need a pathway to citizenship for people who are here. We need protections for dreamers, who this is the only country they know. We need to clean up the lawful immigration system, including reforming and making it simpler to process these things. This is how my dad got here in the 70s, but it's become so much more complicated and bureaucratic since then. And we need to manage the border, and we can do that without having to spend all that money on a wall. The third thing we got to do for the long run is make sure that people can actually prosper in their own countries. Because a lot of people showing up at the border, they're not there because they think it would be nice. They're there because they're fleeing for their lives. We got to make sure people are able to live and succeed in their home countries. It's why we have aid to Central American countries. This administration cut it off. It's cutting off your nose to spite your face. It just makes the problem worse. And so while we can't accept total responsibility for the well-being of other people in other countries, we can do our part to make sure that other countries are more prosperous so that there's fewer people feeling like their lives depend on fleeing to our borders in the first place. That's how we deal with this in the long run. Well, if you go by Twitter, which unfortunately is the best way to understand what's happening with foreign policy these days out of the White House, it would appear that the president pressured the Israeli government to deny American citizens entry into Israel. Now, I don't agree with everything those members of Congress have said, but the whole idea of the freedom of speech is you cannot agree with somebody and still honor their right to say it. And the whole basis of our alliance with Israel is that we're both democracies. So it's disappointing to see an undemocratic act like banning somebody from your country because you don't like what they say. Now, I might not like everything, I might not agree with them on every point, but you know, one of the things that in the past has been impressive about Israel has been that Israelis have been able to dissent from what their government is doing. Just like here in America, a lot of us are dissenting from what our government is doing. And in the long run, it benefits everybody if those principles of freedom of expression are honored by both countries as we move forward. And this, to me, just seems like another political move that's not about the well-being of Israel or the United States. It's about a political kinship between the right-wing government that's currently in power in Israel and the President of the United States. Yes, sir.
There was a recent article from the New York Times about how the internet's been used to fuel the rise of white nationalism, especially with websites like YouTube or Twitter or 4chan. And I was curious what your policy would be to help prevent further radicalization into white nationalism.
Yeah, thanks. There's no question that these extremist ideologies are spreading faster than ever before because of internet technologies. It's one of the reasons why my action plan proposes that the Department of Homeland Security's program on countering violent extremism, which, by the way, this administration cut, which makes no sense, that we beef it up with $1 billion investment so they're actually able to do their job and to help get ahead of these movements. Now, we have also got to deal with technologies and work with technology companies in a way that won't be simple, because we got to honor the First Amendment, but we know that these companies don't want, or at least shouldn't want, to be a platform for hate. So we have to make it easier for these tools to spread that allow them to get ahead of this. And we have to establish some level of responsibility if you're effectively hosting or even publishing this stuff for what goes on. Now, if we have a stronger domestic program for violent extremism, we can also build the kind of partnerships that we have. Think about it this way. You know, when there's illegal activity or material on the internet, for example, illegal imagery on YouTube, let's say, law enforcement can partner with those websites to deal with that. We got to do the same thing when it comes to dangerous violent extremism, and that will be the focus of how my counterterrorism strategy domestically interfaces with the publishers and the tech companies. Right up here.
Do you have any action plan, short, medium, long-term, for the tremendous income inequality that's developed over the last 40 years, and also the wealth inequality is the greatest that has been since the Great Depression?
Yes, the question is about income inequality and wealth inequality. This is a serious problem, and it's among my top priorities. You know, countries historically, when they get to the level of inequality we're seeing right now, they generally don't stay democracies for very long. So this touches everything in our society. So our action plan has to do with making sure that we allow people to earn more and that we have a fairer tax code. Now, on the tax code side, this is not about punishing people for succeeding. This is about asking people to pay their fair share. You know, if a multi-billion-dollar corporation like Amazon pays less in taxes than you or I did, assuming you paid more than $1, then you and I both paid more income taxes federally than Amazon. It's nuts. You add to that the fact that domestically we have been cutting investment in the things that help people get ahead. As long as we have degraded our infrastructure and our schools and our health, then that makes inequality even harder to get over. But some of it's very simple, like higher wages. And I believe that the decline in unionization that happened at the same time as we saw the increase in inequality, that's not an accident. Those two things happened at the same time for a reason. And it's why my administration will support the right to organize and seek to double participation in organized labor. So, the way that this administration has treated LGBTQ Americans is shameful. And it reflects their general instinct, which is to find people who are vulnerable, find people who are suffering, and make it harder in order to score some kind of political point. You know, I admire you for setting up and being involved in GSA in your high school. High school's hard enough when you're not dealing with this kind of stuff. And we have made so much progress in our lifetime on equality, but we got a long way to go. It's why I would sign an Equality Act as soon as it got to my desk that would say that you can't discriminate against somebody because of who they are or who they love. And to me, that's just common sense. You're also going to see us act to reverse the trend of violence against trans women and make sure that anybody who's willing to serve this country is supported by their president, not attacked by our president by tweet, ready to end the careers of honorable service members who've done a good job, especially when the president himself avoided his fingers. The second question is more of a philosophical one, I think. But to me, the most important thing is that people of any gender identity are protected. And that includes making sure they can have ID that reflects that. And above all, that nobody mistreats anyone in the name of who they are or who they love.
Do you support suspending the H-1B visa program until there can be protection for the American workers, where IT companies are replacing American workers with foreign guest workers?
So I believe that we can support American workers without cutting off immigration. As a matter of fact, I think a big part of how our country grows is through immigration. Now, it's also the case that American workers, especially in areas that used to be served by the opportunity to organize, are being left behind. Right now, we have over 1 million jobs about to come online in IT that are going unfilled. So this is one part of the economy where the problem is not enough workers. Now there's a lot we got to do to grow our own and make sure that we're creating the right kind of educational pathways to help people be qualified and prepared for these kinds of jobs. But as has been true at every chapter in American history, we also gain by the fact that we are where some of the most talented people in the world choose to go. And that helps lift up our economies. In fact, I believe that we should be creating more opportunities for people to join our communities and bring their talents here, especially in underserved areas. That's why I would double the Conrad Visa program. That's a program that has doctors who are from overseas rewarded for choosing to serve underserved rural areas. And I think we're going to need that in order to stem the provider shortage that is impacting us. One other thing on workers in the tech industry is that there are the workers who actually have the benefit of officially being an employee of these companies. And then there's everybody else who are technically called contractors. So if you're mopping the floors at Google, you don't have any of the benefits or perks or privileges of working for Google. We got to change that. And we can change that by establishing as part of our labor law that if you function like a worker, if somebody controls the terms of your appointment, I don't care whether you're a contractor or an employee, you are going to get those labor protections. So we have seen our social safety net eroded repeatedly, most recently by proposals by the Trump administration to cut food aid to the hungry. And by the way, can we just establish once and for all that people of faith don't have to go Republican in these times? When food is being taken out of the mouths of the hungry. Scripture tells us to feed the hungry. They're trying to take food away. Scripture tells us to welcome the stranger. They're tearing kids out of the arms of their parents. Scripture tells us that we're supposed to identify with the prisoner. They're putting more and more people in prison. We can do better. Anyway, so you got me going on that. Yes, we need a more robust safety net. That includes the basics, like food aid. It includes making sure that people don't fall through the gaps when it comes to health care. I do believe that we need to, first of all, make sure more people are enrolled in the Earned Income Tax Credit who would benefit from it. And that we expand that tax benefit structure to make it easier to care for children. There's this experiment you mentioned around universal basic income. It's early. I'd like to see more about the results. I think that there is a role for some kind of income floor or guaranteed income. But I don't want to see that turn into an excuse not to make our economy more fair to begin with. Because if we were doing better in just making sure that if you work full time, you're not poor, that would go a long way toward delivering opportunity more widely. And then it would take pressure off those safety net systems and programs that we're talking about. So yes, they need to be strengthened, but we also need to measure our success partly based on how few people have to rely on. And in my administration, when somebody asks us how the economy's doing, we're not going to go off the GDP. I think that's the wrong number. Because right now the GDP is going up and the life expectancy for Americans is going down, which tells you everything you need to know about our economy. So what we'll do instead is we'll measure economic success by the earnings of the 90%. And that'll tell us who's working and how much you're earning when you are.
I haven't heard much from anybody in this campaign season so far about education. I'm a special education teacher in Wisconsin, and like most states, we have a pretty bad teacher shortage. I know most funding for education is going to come at the state and the local level, but I wonder what role do you see the federal government having in trying to address the teacher shortage and drawing people to teaching?
Thank you, and thank you for being involved in special education. It's such an important public service, and it means so much to the families that you serve. And you should have more support from your federal government when you're in that profession. A lot of what we've got to do is support the teaching profession, otherwise we shouldn't be surprised when there's a shortage. And it's especially acute in rural areas, which is why we are proposing that we cut the teacher shortage in half with the right kind of support that's going to be required. Part of that is support for professional development for teachers. A lot of it, let's not overcomplicate this. A big part of how we would get more people willing to be teachers is if we pay teachers more. Like, it's not complicated. And you're right, a lot of this happens at the state and local level, but my administration will also implement grants to boost teacher pay for districts that want to work with us, with an emphasis on supporting Title I schools that have the lowest income students. You know, we've got to show some level of respect for one of the most important professions in America, and that includes compensating accordingly. We will not be as held back by a teacher shortage if we could just honor teachers a little more like soldiers and pay teachers a little more like doctors. And a lot of the other problems start here. Just one more? All right. I know folks here are very patiently kind of craned over. Yes, right there. Yep. Why don't you both go, and then I'll answer both your questions at once, or I'll try.
There's still something in the back of my mind saying that someone's going to come and school me up and leave my daughter with my husband. So, like, what is your, like, what are you going to do to ensure that does not happen to families like us all around the country?
You want to add to that? Or?
No, that's...
Same question? All right. So, there's a policy part of this, and then there's a leadership part of this. The policy part of this is to make sure that we are supporting especially lawful immigration. That's part of how our country grows. And that means diminishing the backlogs, because it's taking way too long to get sorted out, and making it a simpler process to navigate. It also means basing a lot of what we do on the principle of keeping families together. Now, family is another one of those values that we used to hear about a lot from the other side. Now it's time to talk about what it really means to honor family. And part of what it means to honor family is to make sure that you earn enough to support a family. Part of it is making sure that we want families to stay together. And that has implications for our immigration policy. But let's be honest about this. This is also about leadership. This is about culture. This is about the tone that is set by the President of the United States. And when you have a president who wants us to be divided against each other, who wants us to be afraid of anybody who is different, that has a chilling effect on all of our lives. And it has people, even people who are documented and should feel completely secure in this country, looking over their shoulders. And that creates a kind of stress, kind of pressure that is harming all of our communities. I can tell you literally have your hands full right now. So you got enough to worry about without wondering if you are secure in a community where you did everything right. And the bottom line is for us, as community leaders so often do, but our national leaders have failed to do, and what I will do again as president, is make clear that you being here is not something we regard as a favor that we're doing you. It is a blessing that you are bringing to us. We are glad that you are here, and we support you in that journey. They're telling me that our time is up, but I just want to thank you again for being part of this and urge you to stay connected with our campaign. I believe we got a chance on our hands, and maybe the last best one we're going to get, to steer this country onto a better course. And as Iowans, you've got a thumb on the scale of the American political process. We are now getting to the period where it's past kind of get to know you, and it's where we really need to earn your support. And with your help, I believe we have a chance to change the course of this country. But I'm going to need you to spread the interest and the commitment and the passion and the concern for the future of your country that caused you to be here on a very pleasant day when you could be doing lots of things. And spread that to a lot of others who I think are maybe giving up on the political process, who are so frustrated and have seen how negative and bleak and chaotic it is, that they've started to walk away. And you have a chance to change that, because they're going to listen to you. They're going to listen to somebody in their life, a relative, a friend, a neighbor, more than they're going to listen to anything they see on TV. So I'm hoping that I can look to you to spread that sense of hope. I know hope is unfashionable these days in politics, but I don't think you run for office unless you have a sense of hope, because you're running because you believe it's worth it and it's going to make a difference. And I'm asking you to spread that same sense of hope about what is possible in our politics and why it's worth making sure that we not only do away with what's causing so much chaos right now in Washington, but we lift one another up and coming up with something better that's going to lift up our community. So can I look to you to spread that sense of hope across your community?